All right, well, welcome to today's webinar. It's been a couple of months since the MFCA has put on a webinar, and we're definitely excited for this topic today. I think this is going to span a whole host of issues related to where we're at as an industry right now and where we're going. We've kind of, affectionately called this the fitness industry punches back, because I think we've taken a lot of punches here over the course of the past 18 to 20 months. And now I hope and I think that we're shifting from defense to offense, which I think is an exciting place to be. And to have this discussion today, we're joined by a couple of familiar faces as well as some new faces. And I just want to go around and introduce everyone that's on the panel today. So first and foremost, we'll start with beauty and brains before everything else. So we'll start with Alyssa Tushman. She's the owner of Burr Fitness, and she is also the vice chair of the Michigan Fitness Clubs Association. So Alyssa, thanks for joining.
Hi, everyone. When you said beauty, I thought for sure you were talking about Brian.
Well, we're gonna get there quick. Next, Brian Reef, who is the chair of the Michigan Fitness Clubs Association. He's also the CEO of PS Michigan Group, which runs the vast majority of the Planet Fitnesses in Michigan and some in Northern Ohio. Brian, thanks for joining.
Good to be here.
And then our two new faces on the panel. We're actually very excited to be able to have some people that do this on a national level to bring their perspective to this. First, we have Jeff Perkins. He is the Vice President of Government Relations at IHRSA, which is the National Trade Association for our industry. Jeff, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
And then last but certainly not least, Tom. Tom is also representing IHRSA, but as well as his own company, he's a principal at Activist in Motion. So he's involved in a lot of the lobbying efforts that are going on as well. So Tom, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're going to get right into this discussion because there's a lot to discuss, because there's a lot going on right now, and as well there should be. And really kind of what I want to do during this conversation, guys, is thread this from what are current priorities and current efforts that are underway, what's the progress that's been made, and then where we're going, because I think we're fortunate, hopefully, to be pivoting to a longer term strategy with still some shorter term objectives to achieve. And the place I want to start, and we'll start, I think, at the federal level, and then we'll kind of move down to the state level. So for Jeff and Tom, whichever one of you want to take this question first, what are our biggest advocacy priorities right now on a federal level?
Yeah, so I mean, at a federal level, I think there'll be no real surprise here that it's number one with a bullet, and probably number 1, 2, and 3 is the GYMS Act. And I'll also talk about the FIT Act as well, as that's something we are pursuing as well. But that is the top priority in terms of where we stand with the GYMS Act. It's very interesting. We spent a lot of time trying to break into that conversation where restaurants and live event venues were sort of in the conversation around who's going to get relief, and they got some grant programs. We've successfully broken into that group. So we've had conversations with Small Business Committee on the House and the Senate side. The Senate's actually drafting relief language to create a relief program for gyms, which is all very exciting. And so big success in all the work everyone has done in building up all the co-sponsors in the House and recruiting members of the Senate. Like, all the work has paid off to get us to the point where they now acknowledge we need relief and that they're ready to provide some relief. And now I would say that the big question, the $64,000 question right now is, how is that going to be delivered? And by which I mean, as I'm sure everyone can see, if you've picked up a paper in the last several months, it is incredibly challenging for Congress to agree on anything. So the real question is less about our relief, but what bill would it be attached to that can actually get through the process? It looks like they may move on that infrastructure bill in the next couple of days. And so that would sort of clear out part of what they've been fighting about. The most likely candidate we think for Jim's relief to be attached to is an end-of-year omnibus spending bill. We've been told that this will pass, that it's going to be a bipartisan effort. And so the omnibus spending bill is, typically a bipartisan bill, and that's usually passed, in early December, and that handles the spending for the government moving forward for the year. So that's sort of what we have circled in. That's the indications that we're kind of getting that looks like what they're trying to line us up for. But that should be something that that's typically something that gets through the process and is, a bipartisan bill. Right now, the question is, can we get there in this environment?
Yeah.
Tom, if you want to jump in and add anything, but.
Yeah. Well, that was a perfect overview of the legislative landscape. And I think we're having this legislative conversation. There's also this national conversation that we need to have about physical inactivity as a crisis. That is a crisis now, and it was before COVID. As far back as 2014, we had the acting Surgeon General saying that it's the public health crisis of our time. And in fact, it's probably one of the most challenging public health crises we've ever faced as a nation, because there is no cure or vaccine or pill. And so we have to figure out as a country how to engineer physical activity back into our lives. And I think that's this huge challenge that the fitness industry has on a national level, and kind of shapes these conversations we're having legislatively. How can we support the industry, and how do we bring that message forward?
And I think knowing what we know now, based on all the data that we've collected and provided, it was a mistake to close gyms. So not only do we need relief to keep more of our businesses from closing, I can say that I am a personal casualty. I've lost 2 out of 3 of my locations, but focusing on that doesn't do us any good, but going forward, I think it needs to be a mission of both URSA and the state associations to keep that from ever happening again. Closing gyms is a mistake for any pandemic, any health crises going forward. And I think we need to keep our eye on that.
Yeah, as the old Winston Churchill quote goes, let's not waste a good crisis here. We have the opportunity to use this as a springboard. And Tom, I think that's a great point. And I think we can dive into that exact point as we go a little bit further into the webinar and start to talk about what are some of our next steps to address the nation's public health issues. Jeff, you mentioned the FIT Act, and this is although not as urgent of a piece of legislation because of just kind of the existential state that many businesses are in, the FIT Act is a very exciting piece of legislation and maybe a gateway to a lot of other things. You want to break that down for everyone, and then we could talk a little bit more about where it is and what it potentially means?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So the FIT Act, how it would work is it would allow people to use FSA and HSA pre-tax dollars to pay for studio gym memberships. It would also allow them to use that money to pay for youth sports leagues, entering a road race. There's a fairly tight list of qualified physical activity, incentivizing physical activity items that it would apply to. This is something that we've worked closely with SFIA, who has a lot of the big manufacturers. Also, we work closely with youth sports on this issue. As you can imagine, a lot of our lobbying attention has been on the Gyms Act. So what we've done is we've coordinated working with our partners to also promote the FIT Act. We think there might be an opportunity for the FIT Act at the end of the year tax discussion. So that's something that we're supporting and trying to push forward. We sort of look at gyms and fit as relief and recovery. So, the Gyms Act is the relief. That's the life preserver to keep people afloat. And the FIT Act is, something that can help us start to ramp up and bring people back in, hopefully get more Americans exercising and incentivize physical activity and start us down, that bigger policy discussion path that Tom alluded to earlier, but also a way for our industry to ramp back up a bit more quickly.
Yeah, very, very exciting effort. And if I'm not mistaken, Jeff, this legislation has existed for a while, gained some momentum, and then stalled out, and now is kind of reinvigorated. So this is not necessarily a new priority per se.
It is not. The FIT Act has existed in some form or manner for about the last 10 years or so. It passed the House of Representatives in, I believe, 2018, stalled out in the Senate. So, we've gotten to the doorstep before on FIT, as you said, with the great Churchill quote, not, letting a crisis go to waste. I think, one of the things that the pandemic has done is really highlighted the disparate impact of, comorbidities that can be treated by exercise, and how that's been the people who have really suffered the most biggest impact from COVID. And that's a message that we have been hammering home and really sort of trying to make physical activity and exercise a lot more central to how we think about healthcare moving forward and incentivizing healthy living.
Right. Tom, Brian, Alyssa, anything to add on that? I know we're all very excited about the prospect of the FIT Act, because it does seem to move our agenda forward in a very significant and I think appropriate way, given the public health situation in this country. But anything else to add from any of the three of you?
That was always a goal of the Michigan Fitness Club Association. It just wasn't an immediate goal when we first formed in 2020. I'm embarrassed that we didn't form until 2020, but here we are. And that was always going to be one of our long-term goals. So we're very proud of our advocacy. We're very excited about the ramped up efforts that URSA has brought to the table. I mean, URSA is at its best right now, and we know that they'll continue going forward, and any part that we can play in that, we're more than happy to support.
Yeah, we're gonna have to coordinate, and we'll talk about that later on. That's a discussion that needs to be had. Is right now we were formed out of just such a crisis that there wasn't a lot of organization, but now the conversation going forward, and Jeff and Tom, you were there for the same meeting I was at URSA in Dallas, which is, okay, hey, how do we collaborate and combine our efforts so we're not having disparate factions doing different things and reinventing the wheel. So that'll be part of the end of our discussion. Brian, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to expand a little bit on what we have been doing, working with URSA and the MFCA over the last 6 to 9 months as it relates to the Gyms Act. And I think Jeff and Tommy did a great job kind of recapping where we are today, but would also like to talk a little bit about, between now and the end of the year, what can we do as an industry to continue to advocate for ourselves with the Gyms Act. That hands down, and you said it, 1, 2, and 3 priorities right now are to get the Relief Act passed. So I know, we hopefully did our part, board members reaching out to fellow gym owners to press our elected officials, representatives and senators. And I think generally speaking, I'd say we were pretty successful. That effort continues today as it relates to getting co-sponsors. But maybe Jeff, you could shed a little bit more light on, is it important for us between now and the end of the year to attempt to get more co-sponsors? And we can back up a little bit as it relates to what took place here in Michigan. I think I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I believe we've got 6 on the House side, and both senators are co-sponsors. So, Michigan's right up there in terms of, I mean, if we could replicate that across all 50 states, this would pass with flying colors. Unfortunately, some states have been a little bit more of a challenge than others, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, Brian, it's a great question. So, and this ties back into what I've noted in our conversations with House and with Senate leadership. They have emphasized the fact that they see this relief moving in a bipartisan package. And so where we have the tightest margins are in the Senate. And currently we have 26, I believe 26 senators sponsoring the JIMS Act. So, and you correct, you have both Michigan senators are already on board. Building up more support in the Senate, but more critically, Republican support in the Senate. I think we have 4 Republican senators who have signed on, although another 2 have said they're signing on. And we have 3 who are kind of on the fence that we think by bringing these next 2 on, we think we can push them off of the fence. But trying to get to 10 plus Republican senators is a big focus of our lobbying efforts right now to demonstrate that we have the Republican support. Now it's a bit of an interesting exercise, I'll note, because any bill we get attached to, we're going to be a very small piece of. So being realistic, it's very unlikely that someone's going to vote for or against the bigger bill because of us. It's a little bit of an interesting exercise that we keep getting asked to bring some Republican senators to the table. But to the extent that we can do that and demonstrate that we have that support, we can, keep ourselves in that package, which is what we're really trying to do. We don't really have any illusions that necessarily if somebody signs on to the bill, if they don't like, if something gets put in they don't like, that they're going to vote for it just because of us. That's frankly not realistic, but we can work at trying to bring on board those 10 plus Republicans. So that's a big focus, and building up, broader support in the Senate is also a big focus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Jeff. And it sounds like here, it's sort of kind of circle back around to Brian's question. From a state of Michigan perspective, are there any direct actionables at this point, given that we have both of our senators, both Democratic, who are bought into this? Is there anything you would suggest here at the state level?
It's a good question. I don't want to give people something to do just to give you something to do. It doesn't hurt to communicate with your members of Congress and remind them that this is a priority for us. Being signed on is great, but that's supporting the JIMS Act, and that's fantastic. Reminding them that we want this to be part of the next package going through. I think that's something. I think that's somewhere that would be helpful, particularly with outreach to Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters, reminding them that this is something we want to see in the next package, to reinforce that message with Senator Cardin, who's the chair of small business, and Senator Schumer, to keep us in there. If they keep hearing that people want us there, we'll be part of that package.
I think there's a real concern that there are political elements that kind of want to move on beyond COVID and kind of put relief behind and just start moving forward. And it's really important that members of Congress understand that there's an industry that is being left behind. And Michigan has done an amazing job getting support so far, but as Jeff said, just reminding folks that the industry is still lagging the rest of the country right now. That's not right. It's not good economically, but even there's a strong moral case to be made that this particular industry has been harmed very strongly. And that, you know, when they're having internal conversations amongst themselves about what to put in the bill, what to leave out of the bill, just remind your members that you're still here struggling, and ask them to remind their colleagues that there's still this very significant, meaningful part of the country that needs help.
So Tom actually raises a great point, and without incriminating the office, in a conversation with the Republican Senate office, you know, they said, "We get it. You should have been included from the beginning. That we messed up. That was an oversight." But to Tom's point, they said, you know, now we're at this point. If people have held on to now, do you actually really need the relief? Like that was their question. And so, you know, obviously we were able to come back with all the data and everything and say the relief is still desperately needed. People are just hanging on. But he's not wrong that there are some offices that are looking at it that way, who may even acknowledge that we should have been part of it to begin with. That has been, I think, a little bit of the challenge we have faced on that particular side of the aisle that we're working against.
It's interesting because if you look at the statistics here in Michigan, where pre-COVID, it was estimated about 1,100 gyms and fitness centers across the state. We've lost just under 400 of those that have permanently closed. So it feels a little disingenuous when you hear somebody say, sorry, you know, we're sorry you lost a third of the gyms and fitness centers in your state. And it doesn't sit well with us at the MFCA. It shouldn't sit well with anybody in the state of Michigan, because I think it, you know, and that's where you go back to this this paradox of wellness with regard to the pandemic inside the pandemic. And we know pre-COVID, we were in the middle of this massive health crisis, and it has only gotten worse through this. So it's going to be, it's going to be imperative in Michigan for us to get some form of relief, because that a third of those clubs could easily turn into half the clubs in fitness centers here in Michigan pretty quickly. And I think I can speak pretty comfortably on behalf of all of the gyms and fitness centers in Michigan. This first quarter of 2022 is going to be very critical to us. And so we are not out of the woods by any stretch.
So there might be another, of course, the health piece is the most critical as we care about people and care about our members, but speaking from a financial perspective, and I can do that well, there may be a lot of landlords who are waiting on this GYMS Act to see if they're going to ultimately work with their tenants, these gyms, to see, waiting on this GYMS Act to see, you know, should I continue to work with my tenant based on, like I said, this GYMS Act? Because if this GYMS Act does not come through, they may say, you know what, you're never going to be able to pay me, go. So when you say that they're hanging by a thread, that may be why. And so when speaking to legislators, when speaking to these, you know, bipartisan committees who make these decisions, that's the answer. Not just landlords, but other banks. I can tell you that that's what cost us our 2 clubs, was they said, you're never going to be able to pay our arrears. And again, while the government shut us down, our landlords and our bank, they didn't care. So, you know, and I just want to mention one other thing. Our state association, who, as you know, we were one of the states in Michigan closed the longest. We had a really good, positive day. I think it was last week, time just escapes us these days, but with our state legislators asking for relief at the state level. And we aren't going to stop working for that because we hope for federal relief, of course, but we are also asking for state relief, given the numbers that Brian just quoted you, losing so many of our fitness businesses in Michigan. So we'll keep you posted there as well.
Yeah, I'm going to close the loop on, what Jeff and Tom and Brian were talking about, and then let's circle back around to some of the things we've been doing at the state level, because I think it is important to highlight that a little more. I think to close the loop on what everyone just said about what can we be doing is we still have a very, very important message to get out to the public, to lawmakers, to public health officials, for anyone who will listen. And it's a message that has been silenced, or at least quiet, for far too long. And it is the important nature of our industry. And yes, we've made great progress, and the GYMS Act, hopefully becomes a reality, but the underlying message that drives something like the GYMS Act, the FIT Act, and everything else we're doing is that, we are an essential part of the healthcare continuum in this country. And that's a message that we cannot ever stop parroting indefinitely if our industry hopes to get to where it needs to be. So I don't think, Jeff, I appreciate you saying, not looking to give anyone busy work, because we are all very busy, but I think that's just a requisite element of what you need to do if you're a part of our industry, if our industry is going to thrive. So I think those were great points. And I want to shift the discussion really quick. And Alyssa, you took us there with a good transition. Let's just briefly touch on what's happening at the state level, because it was last Wednesday, I think, that we had a legislative day in Lansing where we actually had the opportunity to talk to lawmakers about our state level ask. So, maybe Brian, if you want to explain a little bit of, like, on a technical level what that is, and then we can just maybe give us a little bit of information on how our day went.
Sure. So the MFCA has outlined a targeted financial relief package that we've introduced to various legislators here in Michigan. We had a really good day organized through our lobbying firm in Lansing, scheduling meetings starting at 9 o'clock in the morning all the way through 4 o'clock in the afternoon, hosted a lunch at the Capitol, got to meet a lot of the individuals who we targeted, mostly appropriations committee members, which is where this would have to be introduced. And I don't think there was a single elected official that we met with, senator or representative, that didn't support what we're asking for. Very similar discussion as it relates, in terms of what's going on at the national level, and whether we like it or not. Is it, do you need the relief now? Are we through the pandemic? But the overwhelming sense was, being here in Michigan, we're not out of the pandemic yet, and it is still, it's I hate to say, it's alive and well here in Michigan. So I think we do have a lot of support to get something outlined and introduced. I believe a similar timeline, and in terms of paralleling what's going on with the GYMS Act at the federal level, and whether this gets introduced as part of a supplemental package through the budgeting process is likely where this would go. But there's activity almost on a daily basis in terms of us pushing that package forward and getting somebody on board to support us.
Great. Alyssa, you were there also. I didn't have the opportunity to be there. I was traveling. So curious just what your impressions of the day were.
Yeah, I thought it was a great day. They all asked great questions. One of the questions, of course, was what has been done in other states with regard to state relief, and our answer was very simple, and we don't know of any. However, in our state, we were closed one of the longest, and we're in the top 5 states with the most closures and hit the hardest, and they seem to respond really well to that. We were able to get their attention. I think each of us pitched, we kept our pitch. What we did basically was divide and conquer. Our lobbyist had us set up for meetings. Sometimes they overlapped. So we hit that, we explained very concisely what our ask was, and we based our formula on being closed 6 months and the fact that each gym, we basically averaged the size of our gyms and based the rent number on an average. And it was pretty, they all felt that it was pretty reasonable once we explained the ask and how long we were closed, and we were in the top 5, and nobody was argumentative at all. And I think we really were able to get them to understand how hard we were hit. And we explained to them that our industry was really one of the only ones that was hit this hard without relief at the federal level. We explained that concerts and stages and movies and restaurants were able to obtain that relief at the federal level, and gyms were not. And it just didn't make sense to anyone. So I think it was a really good day.
And the other thing, just quickly to point out, this is, and in terms of actual numbers, we arrived at about $63 to $64 million for the state. And as Alyssa mentioned, that the basis of it was our occupancy cost based on the average size of the gym, closed for 6 months. But the other relevant piece is it mirrors largely the GYMS Act. We're taking similar eligibility requirements and then use of proceeds modeled after the GYMS Act, which I think everybody agrees is a reasonable approach for it. And this is money that has already come into the state or has already been budgeted to come into the state as COVID relief from the federal government. So we're asking for money that was earmarked for COVID relief, for something that clearly, was a function of the shutdown, and is our ask is 100% COVID related.
Yeah, two things that I'm struck by. The first thing, and I hope this isn't lost on anyone that's listening, is May of 2020, this MFCA forms, and here we are, a year and a half later, and we're in Lansing having meetings with lawmakers. That was inconceivable prior to COVID. And the fact that we do have that, we've talked about a seat at the table and a voice in the room. Like we had the table last Wednesday in Lansing. I think that's a very exciting thing. And that just shows how far we've come, but still how far we have to go, because we've only had one of those days exist in the history of the fitness industry in Michigan. The other piece that I'm excited to hear about, and this is actually the first time I've heard about it because we haven't had a chance to chat since that legislative day. Going into that day, the sentiment on our original ask was, wow, this is a lot of money. Are you sure? And it sounds like, coming out of that day with the fact that we could actually have those conversations with them, we were able to lay out a very coherent case as to why we needed that kind of money. And it goes to show that, based upon your experience that day, that those conversations and efforts like that do make a substantive difference, which is great. And I think it opens the door for us to do these kind of things more often.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you've created, I don't want to take us on a tangent, Mike, but it sounds like you've created a really good blueprint, which I imagine, I think I know the answer, but I assume you'd be willing to share with some other states that I know are going down this path of seeking, state level financial support from that. I think it's the ARPA funding that came down from the feds.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the experience you've described really speaks to how important it is to get in front of legislators and explain who you are. Because historically, the fitness industry has been so misunderstood and undervalued and mostly isolated from the rest of the community, certainly the healthcare system, but it's just kind of been off on its own. And when you get in front of people and explain the amazing things that are happening in your gyms, and at the same time why you need relief, those can be really powerful conversations. And like Jeff said, that can be replicated all around the country. So thanks for your leadership and showing others how it can be done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tom. And I think, and to URSA's credit, the advocacy and the outreach campaigns are wonderful. I mean, being able to send an email directly to somebody without having to think about who is my elected official, but putting a name with a face and having those live conversations, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that is what is necessary in order for us to affect change. It just takes a commitment on whoever is involved to go down that path. And our experience working with our lobbyists now over almost 18 months and bringing this group together has been great. And it's been an interesting exercise. It's a lot of work for an all volunteer organization, but I think, at the end of the day, there probably aren't any other states or any other gym owners in other states that would argue the fact that, well, this is a waste of my time. It's the exact opposite.
And I still think that we're fighting an age-old poor image for this industry. And I think that we'll just have to continue to fight it for as long as we need to. The old dumb gym owner, chalk, steroid, and as silly as it sounds to people like us, I still pay attention to the look on some of these faces in the legislators that are mildly surprised when they see, educated business owners come before them. I pay attention to that. I look for it and I see it. And it's a pleasant surprise when we walk into a room but listen, it's what we have to do.
Yeah, there's definitely an unconscious bias there that exists towards like what the perception of our industry has been. And to everyone's point, this is a movement, and any movement that you're creating, no pun intended, any movement you're creating requires a top-down approach, certainly all the things that URSA is doing, but it requires that grassroots bottom-up approach to meet in the middle. And I think it's probably a good segue in our conversation to talk about where we're headed. And what I'm keen to kind of talk about, and I'm not quite sure where this discussion is going to go because everything is so fluid right now, but URSA has hired a new CEO, Liz Clark, who had a very strong lobbying presence in Washington for many years. I had a chance to meet her at URSA. It's a very dynamic, passionate woman who actually took the time to talk to me, which I was grateful for because it seemed like her head was spinning with all the things she had to do there. So we've hired this new CEO. We've got URSA with all these priorities and all this momentum. We've got state alliances forming. So there's lots of action and there's lots of ideas, but I often like to say, the world is long on ideas, but it's short on execution. And, right now we're figuring out how to execute effectively. So I guess, Jeff and Tom, I'll start with you from your perspective. Beyond GYMS Act, which is priority 1 through 10, and FIT, which is another legislative priority, like operationally, what are some of the things that are coming down the pipes that we're trying to figure out and move everyone forward, both at the state and the national level?
Sure. So at the national level, I think, given Liz's experience and her presence in DC, we're seeing movement forward on URSA has a political action committee, and that's something that, we're reinvesting in, and we're going to be looking to grow to make sure that we are much more of a presence in DC, not just a physical presence and a face that's talking to them consistently, although we're going to do that, but also supporting members financially, which we hate to say it, but that's what helps keep the doors of communication open. That's just a reality of how politics work. So that's already in flight in terms of getting that all relaunched and moving forward. So I think you're going to see, as we move forward, a much more permanent and sustained relationship building at the national level in DC. And then if you wanted to segue to state in some of the conversation we had in Dallas.
Well, let me ask a question just for clarification for some of our listeners, because I know I didn't really understand it very well. Can you just give a brief explanation of what a political action committee is? Just because I think we hear of these things, but as people that haven't been really involved in politics, I think defining that term and what its utility is, I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll try and go with the most simple explanation, because it's become infinitely more complicated in the last 6 to 7 years, as Tom is laughing. So URSA, like virtually all trade associations, has what's called a separate segregated fund political action committee. This is kind of, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, like a traditional PAC. In a traditional PAC, we can raise donations from our members, which we can then use to contribute to federal political campaigns. So member of Congress running for re-election, we can contribute up to $5,000 cap. That contribution also oftentimes goes hand in hand with attending an event with that member. So you're giving them money and also getting in front of them. So there's, to Brian's point, it's putting a name with a face, with an industry, with a, with what's sort of important to you. Excuse me. So that's the type of PAC that URSA has, which is separate and distinct from, you've probably heard of super PACs and things like that, which are a whole other animal, which can kind of raise money from just about anywhere, but they can't give money to candidates directly. They run their own commercials, and they're not supposed to really be in contact with the candidates for office. They can run the commercial saying, vote for Alyssa on Tuesday, but they can't talk to Alyssa's campaign and say, what do you need us to do? So it's not that's not what we have. So it's really growing that PAC and then making those contributions, which does two things. One, it supports the members who are our champions in Washington, DC, in a tangible way, financially. But it also, reinforces that relationship and that connection and gives further opportunities to have, direct contact with the member themselves.
Yeah, great explanation. And I think there were some stories told, and I won't dive into the specific stories at URSA about the role that the relationships that are formed because of these PACs and because of these contributions, allowing for phone calls and direct interactions with legislators that actually can stop onerous political action on an industry based upon those relationships. And money talks. It does. And whether you agree or disagree with that on a philosophical level, it's the reality of our government. So Jeff, I think that was a great explanation, because I knew personally, like, hey, I pay my money to URSA. I want to support URSA. I want to support the MFCA. But then there's this other thing that sits off to the side, which is a very, very powerful lever for us to be able to use. And we don't need to make this a lobbying and political tutorial here, but I think that that's important to realize. So thank you for that. And let's transition to some of the conversations we were having about, okay, how do we make this connection between state and national level?
Happy to. Do you want to jump, Tom, or do you want me to?
I can give it a try, but I think the philosophy is how do we leverage strengths and find the efficiencies, so that if there's a central coordinating role that URSA can perform that is cost effective for everybody, and then you have active state alliances or state leadership, whatever that group might be, on the ground, really driving those relationships at the local level, and you have URSA at the national level providing legislative monitoring, research, data, messaging, that can kind of get pushed down and then used as appropriate, however, feels right locally. That seems like, the right model that we can really build off of. Jeff, would you add anything to that? Or Michael, certainly you were at the meeting in Dallas.
To build off of what Tom said, taking the feedback that we got in Dallas and then from others that we shared that presentation with, we've been working on putting together sort of a framework that we think will hopefully address a lot of people's interests. And what we're hearing is, how can we provide some administrative supports? What are some of the lobbying supports? And so we're working on that, because as you noted, Brian, in the last 18 months, you in Michigan and others in other states have done all this fantastic work. You've built all these bridges. We don't want to lose those. What my favorite motto is, the first time you meet someone shouldn't be when you're asking for something in politics. Now, unfortunately, that's where we found ourselves. But now the work's been done, and you're becoming known, and they're starting to understand our industry. We can't then go away. So it's maintaining those bridges, maintaining the message, and educating. Excuse me. And nothing like a good fluid interruption to a speech. Maintaining that education and recognizing, Alyssa, something you talked about before, only about 2 out of 5 people in America use one of our facilities. So we have a bigger gap, we have a bit bigger hill to climb with the other 80% of the country on getting them to understand what we do, that we aren't the gym that you picture in your mind from 1980. Really what our role is. That's something that, I think we do have, there's a perception that exists that we are working against, and we need to relentlessly communicate who we actually are, what we actually do, and why we're important. And that's where I think, the work you're doing is hugely important, because it's at the state and local level where a lot of this is going to happen.
Jeff is so passionate about this. He's getting choked up. I understand it. I'll add and give you a second to take a drink of water, Jeff. The one thing that we seem to really coalesce around in that conversation is that there needs to be more education, and education of our legislative representatives. They need to understand where we're at and what we do, to your point, but also education within our industry. Quite frankly, the fact that we only have 150 gyms in the state of Michigan, most of which are Planet Fitnesses and powerhouses, thanks to the Davishes and thanks to Brian and his team that are a part of the MFCA, we are still only communicating with and collaborating with a fraction of the whole. And if we're going to be successful, the education needs to start in our industry. And for those of you that are either attending this or you watch this on video, I think not just understanding this message for yourself, but we all have so many professional connections, educating other people on everything that we're talking about. Because I know prior to COVID, I didn't understand a lobbying process. I didn't know what a lobbyist did. I didn't even know why it was important. And, maybe that's very naive of me, but I think that was most of our industry. And we've been kind of shooken awake by this whole crisis. And I think we have to be willing to educate our colleagues in our industry first and foremost, if we're going to start to get momentum. Because if we had all 750 gyms that are left in the state of Michigan as a part of the MFCA, just imagine what we could be doing. So I think that the education piece that we talked about and some unified messaging coming down from URSA, I think is critical.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would add to that, if there is a silver lining in a pandemic, it was that it absolutely highlighted the need for all of us to take better care of ourselves. And you don't get that opportunity industry focused ever. So but it's imperative that we make sure that message gets delivered and take advantage of that. coming out of this pandemic, because it was things were fine pre-pandemic, and we were all going about our business, not really understanding that there was a health crisis going on, because we were so focused on our businesses. But now, through things like the Michigan Fitness Club Association and any state alliance for that matter, and on up through URSA, making sure that we are increasing awareness to that, it's a good thing for us, and that will, that's what we're here for. To all of us got into the business to largely to inspire people to lead healthier lives.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, so I was just going to say, I think the other thing in terms of, building and what's the long game, I think it's important for people to remember. I think sometimes people get a little intimidated by the political process and lobbying and political action committees, and this is moving from this committee to this, and whereas at a more basic level, it's not that challenging. It's getting to know your local state rep, inviting them to see your facility and take a tour. They love that stuff. Maybe there's a photo op there. And getting them to understand what's your business, why is it important, and why is it important to get to know, the local, state rep, the city councilors, your mayor. These are the people that go on to become the state senators, the members of Congress, and the US senators. By and large, that's where they come from. It's their staff, it's them. So you start building these relationships now, and now you suddenly find, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, the member of Congress for your district, because you got to know them 10 years ago when they came and toured your facility. And so, it's a great way to sort of, that grassroots, you're building a farm team, you're investing in a lot of prospects, and you're educating them on your issue, knowing that some of them are going to make their way up to higher and higher levels where, them understanding what you do will protect you from potential harm and could create opportunities for you moving forward.
Yeah. And let's be honest, if there's one thing that in our industry we know how to do really well, we're a relationship-based business. We're forming relationships every single day. It's our businesses live and die on that. So I think that's such an important point, Jeff, despite all of this somewhat novel and complex terminology, PACs and all these things that were thrown on your head can start spinning. At the end of the day, you said it, it's reach out, develop relationships, and keep the message present. I want to be sensitive to time. We're coming up on 1 o'clock, and we definitely try to keep these under an hour. And I'm going to reach out to all of you guys for final thoughts here in a second. But I think I want to tie this all together with, we do like to give actionables going away from these things, because again, we're in a point where ideas and visions are great, but we actually need to start executing. We need to make sure we're doing things. So things that we heard today, first and foremost, are keep the message present, however you can, wherever you can. Make sure you're educating your not only your local representatives and legislator, but also you're educating your colleagues in the industry, your members. The more people we can have to proliferate this message, the more powerful it could be. Education, things like this that we're doing, we're going to send this out in a video to all of you. Send it out to as many people as you can. Maybe 25% of them watch it, but that's still more people than know this information right now. And I think the last thing, and this is where I'll kind of turn it over to Brian and Jeff, kind of representing the MFCA and URSA respectively. Jeff, in terms of an action step, certainly everything we're talking about costs money. Yes, at the MFCA, we're volunteering our time, but URSA has a paid staff, so they've got to cover their cost, and all these other things cost money. The MFCA is trying to do things, it costs money. So part of this is we need support. So from URSA's standpoint, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, all right, I want to get involved, I want to support, what could they do?
So I think probably maybe the easiest step is we've revamped our membership, and in conjunction with Liz taking over as CEO, and the focus really squarely coming on to advocacy, a portion of every membership dues is channeled specifically towards advocacy. with the highest percentage, which I believe, and Tom, zap me if I'm wrong, I think is 75% if you're a premium member goes to advocacy. And so that's not just important at the federal level, because it's from these funds that we're going to figure out how we're providing support, financial support to the state activities as well. So if you want, in terms of investing in advocacy for the industry at the national and the state level, I think that's a good place to start from an URSA perspective.
Awesome. And when we send this out to everyone, we'll link up to the link to the URSA membership so you can see that. And it really is I think a appropriately revamped structure that allow a broad cross section of the industry, even smaller studios and individuals, to contribute to this larger effort. Brian, let's throw it over to you on the MFCA end. The asks here at this point are relatively obvious, but I'll let you go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I think it mirrors what Jeff just said. We went in and we've already revamped our dues schedule. We reduced the fees by 66 or close to 70% to make it more affordable. Understanding that our fellow gym owners are suffering right now, and it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily rise to the top in terms of having the ability to pay dues to an association. But we did it with the intent of making it affordable. Even if you can't afford it today, at least reach out to us and attempt to get involved. It's not, we do have some flexibility as it relates to the dues structure. But I think the important thing is, and you touched on this earlier, is as it stands today, we've only got about 140 clubs that are represented here in the state of Michigan, out of a little over 700 clubs. So we really, there is absolutely power in numbers and getting that membership ramped up. It will continue to allow us to do a lot more from an advocacy perspective. We recognize that it's a marathon for us, where we are in our infancy, so it's going to take some time for us to get to that point. But every opportunity that we have, we would like to get more people, more fitness center and gym owners in the state involved in the Michigan Fitness Club Association.
Awesome. Well, the exciting thing that I can say on behalf of the MFCA is on the Friday the 12th, we actually have our first in-person strategy retreat to be talking about what is the next step for us. And so for everyone that's listening, either live or via video, I'm sure we'll have another webinar coming out of that to explain some of our initiatives going into 2022. But Brian, Alyssa, Jeff, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else who's watching this either live or on a recorded basis, thank you so much for joining us. And you heard it, support URSA, support the MFCA, share this message, educate. We are only going to get through this if we stick together. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, Jeff and Tom, thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure. Thanks for all the work you're doing.